As I said throughout my term, my priorities are first the people of Minnesota, and secondly providing good jobs for all of them. And my supplemental budget addresses those two priorities, people and jobs. In terms of jobs, I propose a tax credit for businesses who hire unemployed veterans, recent college graduates, other unemployed. It would create over 14,000 jobs by giving the businesses that incentive and tax relief that would total $35 million, almost all of it in the next biennium because of the delay in getting that credit restored. Secondly, the so-called fast track, proven to be a very successful job training program for people who don't have previous work experience at $2.4 million, $2 million, that would allow us to expand it into other MNSCU campuses. And thirdly, the Minnesota Investment Fund, which has proven to be very, very successful, operating out of the Department of Economic and Economic Security, which actually, I must say, was a fund that I thought of back in 1983 or 4. So, and lasted all this long. So obviously, it's got bipartisan support. So I'm hoping that that will be funded further so it can continue to provide incentives for business to locate or expand here in Minnesota rather than some other state and create jobs as a result. In terms of my priority for the rest of Minnesota, people who are now employed, for veterans, we would propose to expand the GI Bill to include all veterans so they can take advantage of the opportunity to further their education, to go retrain for a new job opportunity, as well as to refund the Honor Guard, which is so extraordinary in its dedication to come to every funeral or service for a fallen veteran and deserve the $100 at least for their travel expenses. And also, and this is an idea of Senator John Harrington, to provide reimbursement for protective vests for law enforcement officers. Where that fund has now been depleted, so we would restore the opportunity to support them in getting the life-protecting devices they certainly deserve. And most of the rest of the budget supplemental goes for Health and Human Services to restore some, not all, but some of the most extreme cuts that occurred in the last session. We've prioritized programs that provide the most immediate help to people who are in serious condition. The chemotherapy and dialysis of people who are on emergency medical assistance, the paying the family personal care attendants the same amount as others, which is a matter that's going to the courts as after the last session. And when I heard a great deal from the university and others around the state, restoring some of the funding for called MERC, for medical education, for particularly training doctors in greater Minnesota who hopefully will build their careers there. As you recall, I told the legislature a couple of weeks ago that any increase in spending had to be offset with either reductions in spending or additional tax revenues, and I held myself to that same standard. This $44 million in additional general fund spending would be paid by establishing the affiliate nexus tax, something I proposed last year, which didn't pass the legislature. I'm hopeful that the legislature will reconsider and do so this year. It would level the playing field for Minnesota home-based retailers and merchants so that they, as they say now, become the shopping center for people who want to look at various devices, and then they go online and buy them and pay no sales tax. So this levels the playing field and also would raise $3.7 million in revenue for this biennium. And the second is to reduce corporate tax expenditures. Tax loopholes are, as the Department of Revenue points out, tax expenditures. And in this case, we have given a huge tax break to companies that have foreign operating companies set up overseas or foreign royalties. They can exclude 80% of those that income from paying any Minnesota tax. Why do we want to give incentives to companies, big companies, most of them, for putting jobs overseas rather than investing that money in the future of the people of Minnesota? So that's my priority, and challenge the legislature to make it their priority and say we're going to reduce the tax expenditures, we're going to reduce the benefits that go solely to overseas, out of the country corporations or their activities. We're going to bring that money back home, and we're going to invest it in the future of our state. With that, let me turn it over to Commissioner Management Budget, Mr. Showalter, and others in turn, and they can answer all your questions.
Thank you, Governor. Just a couple of brief context remarks for everyone. The supplemental budget, as you know, is built off of the biennial budget and forecast changes from November and also just recently in February. At the end of the February forecast, we had a zero balance. Governor basically is paying as he goes so that all of the new investments that are included in this budget recommendation are paid for by additional revenues, so that this is a self-balancing package. It is balanced both in this biennium and in the next biennium, not creating any new liabilities going into the future. There are additional non-general fund recommendations, some fee-supported activities where there's either balances or where fees have to be increased to get to some urgent activities that need to be addressed right now. All in all of these recommendations are, again, a self-balancing, a complete package that doesn't draw down any reserves, doesn't call for any changes in the supplemental budget. It's really built on the existing forecast and going above that. The numbers that you have before you are really quite small. In terms of looking at previous supplemental budgets, you'll see in the past they were significantly larger. There's a sense of urgency to these requests. That was a significant piece of our review, looking whether we could get these things done in the future or whether we needed to address them right now. And as the governor said, looking at jobs, looking at some of the health care issues, there were issues that needed to be addressed this session, and that's what you see here. This package is still quite slimmed down and really quite modest going forward. There are the usual sorts of detail that you can access from MMB, issuing the revenues, the spending, and how those fit into the overall state budget, and be happy to give you more of that information as we go along. I'd like to turn it over to Commissioner Jessen to talk about the largest set of spending changes in the general fund in the Health and Human Services area.
Thank you, Governor and Commissioner Showalter. Well, in case it slipped any of your minds, last year we did, in light of the historic budget deficit, cut almost $1 billion from the projected Health and Human Services budget. You know, and you don't cut $1 billion without harming people and the providers that care for them, much as we tried to make it otherwise. But we can't turn our backs, I don't think, on the need for further reform and continued budget vigilance. But we can address a few of those cuts that pose the most immediate harm to people and to our health care infrastructure. So as the governor said, we can and I think we should fund these life-saving treatments such as dialysis and chemotherapy to people who are on emergency medical assistance. And we can and should pay relatives who care for their disabled family members the same that we would pay other people. And we can and should restore some of the medical education dollars. It's about half of them that we're restoring in the next year. And that's really so that we can continue to train physicians in Minnesota, because we know, especially in greater Minnesota, we need them, and if we train them there, they often and usually stay there. And we can and should ease the impacts, not do away with them entirely, but at least ease the cuts and provide some transition for some of those providers who provide care in the community for people with disabilities and people with mental illness. So with this supplemental budget, we can do those things, a few additional small matters that are in the materials. Thank you all. I'm happy to answer questions.
Mr. Grants.
Good morning. As the governor indicated, we're really focused on tax expenditures as a way to reasonably finance these changes. As some of you may know, in 2010, the Department of Revenue received about $16 billion in tax revenue, and we did not receive, or we gave preferences, or we gave credits for almost $11 billion of tax expenditures. The governor's package is really modest. It takes a look at only two tax expenditures, the affiliate nexus that helps level the playing field, as the governor mentioned, and the FOC foreign royalty provision, which once again is just a haircut on this preference. Right now it's an 80% deduction for those kinds of qualifying income from overseas. This would take it from an 80 to a 69% deduction in the first year. I'm sorry, 62%, and then it would take it from an 80 to a 39% deduction in the second year. So it's a very focused deduction change that would limit those deductions and increase the revenue for this package. Thank you.
Commissioner, do you want to respond to anything on the protective vest questions? Okay. All right. Questions?
Do we have an estimate of how many people would get more aid under the Human Services budget?
Thank you for the question. In this situation, it's not that people have entirely lost eligibility. During the budget negotiations last year, one of the things that the governor really sought to protect was to maintain eligibility for benefits for Minnesotans. That was one of the primary things that we strove to do and did. On the other hand, we had to cut some of those benefits. And so that's what you see. It's not that people were removed, for example, from emergency medical assistance so much as what they got on that program was limited. So we're expanding that some, but not all the way. Similarly, with the PCA relative cut, we didn't take away eligibility for people, but we limited what we were paying some providers. So we're restoring that. And one of the reasons we're doing some of those restorations is not only to help people have the more critically needed benefits, such as dialysis, but also with some of the cuts to the, especially in the long-term care area, we were concerned that we were limiting people's access. If we weren't paying providers enough, were they going to stop providing the care? And that obviously hurts individuals.
So did you get reports of anybody who said, you cut us, I can't afford this care anymore?
The emergency, the dialysis.
Well, yes, we've certainly heard that, and that's what we're trying to respond to. As the governor said, we chose to propose restoring these things because we see immediate risk of harm very much to people if we don't take these steps.
I heard from several legislators representing lower income areas who said that they had constituents who are on emergency medical assistance who were then being threatened to be taken off of dialysis, chemotherapy, some of the truly life-saving techniques in the critical conditions they were in. You, I believe, acted to try to buy some time with that so they wouldn't be cut off, but it does take the legislature to approve that to make it permanent. And I would also just point out again that the family members who are affected as personal care attendants by the 20% reduction in their payments have gone to court, and there's now an injunction preventing that from being put in effect. So that has not taken place yet either, but again, this proposal would remedy that situation as well as to take care of the court litigation.
Can someone talk about the scope and size of the hunting and fishing fee license changes?
I'm sorry?
The scope and the size of the hunting and fishing fee changes?
I don't have a lot of detail on that. These are some of the fee changes that were already in front of the legislature last year. So these are as much renewing the governor's support for some of these changes, and some of them have actually been addressed, I believe, in committee already.
Mr. Niskin with DNR provide you with that detail. And obviously the increased expenditures from the funds are contingent on getting the approval to raise the fees.
Governor, Republicans have been reluctant to do the FOC change, like you've mentioned. They are some members are talking about the so-called Amazon tax, the affiliate nexus. I mean, realistically, how much of this do you think is going to get through this year, knowing where the Republicans stand on?
It's up to them. It's up to the Republicans who have the majority in the legislature whether they want to invest in the people of Minnesota or whether they want to invest in foreign overseas corporate operations. And to me, the choice is very clear. You focus on Minnesota. If you want to provide tax expenditures to assist the people in locating jobs over the ocean, that's a strange priority for state legislators elected to serve the people of Minnesota.
But don't some of those companies that benefit from that tax are some of the
There are
largest in the
certainly
country?
Minnesota companies, or they wouldn't be paying taxes in Minnesota. But the fact is, we're just asking, again, to level the playing field and have them pay taxes on their earnings, regardless of where they occur, the same way we're asking other Minnesota businesses who make money in other states to pay according to their earnings and not give them an 80% deduction for encouraging job development overseas.
Have you talked to Republican leaders to see if they're interested in this?
We talked with them about the affiliate nexus, considerable detail last spring and summer, and mentioned and talked to Representative Davids, chairs the House Tax Committee, and Senator Ortman. I think Representative Davids, I believe, supports it. I don't want to speak for anybody else, but have talked on that one. I've not talked on the FOC.
Governor, is there anything in here you have to have this year, knowing that the budget does not have to be balanced?
Well, it's a question of, do the people of Minnesota have to have it? 160,000 Minnesotans are unemployed, and they have to have jobs. And I'm still waiting for a jobs bill to come from the legislature to include my proposals and any of their good ideas so that we can put people back to work in Minnesota, as well as the bonding bill, which will do that, and as well as the stadium bill, which will also put thousands of Minnesotans back to work. So, that it's not about me, it's about the people of Minnesota. And again, we've got a way to pay for this that balances the budget right away. And it's just a question whether the priority is the people of Minnesota, which is mine, or foreign operating corporations, which may be somebody else's. But I think people who take that position and won't close these loopholes need to explain to the people of Minnesota why investment funds that are going to create jobs and a tax credit that's going to create jobs and fast-track training, which is proven to successful in getting people ready for employment, why those aren't priorities. Why not police protective vests for police officers and expanding the GI Bill for returning veterans? I mean, those are things that just are so obvious to me in the best interest of Minnesota, and I'd be really appalled if those priorities are not reflected in the outcome.
Governor, they say that the Republicans say that closing these loopholes is just, if you call them loopholes, they take a different view, but is it just additional burden on business at a time when business people are struggling to try to get out of the recession, finally pulling out of it?
Well, according to the Republicans, there's never a good time to tax businesses, and the larger the more the protection they provide them. I'd like to look, as part of the Commissioner Franz's overall tax reform, at looking at corporate tax for the rate, especially for smaller businesses that do most or all of their business within Minnesota. But I'm not concerned about the largest corporations in Minnesota paying a few dollars more and just taking an 80% deduction down to 62% and then 39%. It's still 39% more than other Minnesota companies get off of their domestic earnings. So, asking them to shoulder their fair share looks like to them like a tax increase, but as does my raising income taxes on the wealthiest 2%. But it's just basic fairness, in my view.
Any other questions on this topic? You folks have questions on other topics? Yes.
Governor, the Capitol's packed today with folks who are opposed to right to work. From your perspective, appreciate a comment or two.
Well, I strongly oppose the amendment. It's a misnomer. It's the right to work for lower wages than people work for now in Minnesota, and the statistics are very clear that those states that have so-called right-to-work laws have a lower per capita income than states like Minnesota, which do not. And it also shows that there's no improvement in their unemployment rates or job growth compared to those states who do not have a law. So it benefits some people who want to provide cheap jobs rather than well-paying, family-supporting jobs, but it doesn't pay off for the future of the state of Minnesota. If we want to invest in a good education system, which is crucial to our future success, we want to invest in good highways and public transit, if we want to invest in the kind of infrastructure that businesses need to be successful as well as citizens need to enjoy a quality of life, then this would be absolutely the wrong way to go.
If they put it on the ballot this fall, Governor, what are the political implications of that?
I'm not going to prejudge it. I just, I hope it'll not be put on the ballot, and if it is, I hope and believe that people of Minnesota will reject it strongly.
Governor, you have some money in the budget here for fighting Asian carp. Do you, well, first of all, we haven't seen a carp summit lately. Do you plan any more of those soon? And do you think that that money is actually going to be able to be put in place this year, as at your last summit you wanted this year, but the Corps of Engineers seems to think it needs more time, and it's looking a little more doubtful that something will actually happen this year?
Well, there are kind of two categories. One is the state funding, and I am optimistic that we'll get some in addition to what we had last year, in addition to the bonding bill last year, which provided $14 million to renovate the Coon Rapids Dam. So we've talked with Senator Ingebrigtsen and Representative McNamara, the chairs of the two committees, and we've been on ongoing discussions with them, and Commissioner Landwehr with the DNR has been in conversations with them. I asked actually Commissioner Landwehr in the last week if we should do another summit after there was word of the carp being caught in Winona, and he thought it would be better to convene a meeting with the legislative leaders and just focus on the state legislation. So I asked him to set that up, and I assume he will very shortly. On the federal side, I saw Representative Eric Paulson at the event on Saturday, and he told me that he and Senator Klobuchar are introducing jointly the federal legislation that would provide some funding for the Corps to do evaluation, whatever. The Corps moves notoriously slowly in everything, and so I'm not optimistic that one's going to be ready very soon. So I don't depend on that one. It'd be great if it happens, but we got to take the initiative ourselves and do everything possible to keep this infestation out of Minnesota.
You've been meeting with Chief Justice Gilday and Senator Ortman today, I assume, on tort reform bills that you were pretty critical of when you vetoed them. How do you see those conversations going out, and do you foresee any kind of deal being reached to move some of those things forward this session?
Well, Senator Ortman requested the meeting, and I, in my veto letters, pointed out that the Supreme Court had not been consulted, and they had actually, through a couple of their policy task forces, taken positions contrary to what the legislation would do. So Senator Ortman asked for a meeting to sit down with the Chief Justice and myself and review. I don't know what the content's going to be, but I certainly appreciate her willingness to sit down and talk, and I'm always willing to talk with legislators on any subject. I haven't made any commitments to change anything, but I'm certainly willing to listen.
Have you made progress with the legislature on a bonding bill, and also linked to that, how about the state capitol? Is there funding likely to be offered this year for a renovation project here? I'm
hopeful for both of them. I think we will have a bonding bill at the end of the session. Words seems more like about $500 million than the $775 million that I propose. That just means fewer jobs and fewer good projects around the state are going to be funded. But I'm optimistic about that, and I'm hopeful for the Capitol. I mean, they haven't really addressed it yet, and nobody wants to, happily, because it's such a dislocation for as many as 4 years, people not being able to access the Capitol, the public, and legislators, the press, and those of us who work here. But it's something that just has to be done, and I tend to believe that at the very end, I talked with Senator Senjum about it in the last week, and again, he made no commitments, but he seemed favorable and realizing that we have to do something. Representative Matt Dean's been on the commission; he's been very supportive of all that. And again, I'm not committing him to push it in the House, but I think there are people on both sides of the aisle and both bodies that recognize that we have to do this.
Are you sworn? use of legacy money for the capital. Of some lawmakers, and Republicans specifically, see that that's a possible pot of money that can be tapped in some.
I think we're better off to issue bonds, general obligation bonds. I wouldn't attribute them to the same as the ones we're doing for other projects around the state. But I think Minnesotans realize, I mean, this is a state treasure. It's really a national treasure. I've been all over this country, and this is by far and away the best Capitol building in America. And it most closely resembles the U.S. Capitol. And, it's been 100 years, and it's starting to fall apart. And it's going to fall on somebody's head, unfortunately, if we don't act. So the imperative is there, and we're not doing this for ourselves. In fact, it's going to be disruptive. I said in my State of the State, this will be the least selfish vote any legislature will cast. Could be disrupting their own careers and lives if they're back here next year for the foreseeable future. But it's the right thing to do for the future of Minnesota for the next 100 years. And that's why I think ultimately, I know the people of Minnesota will support it, and I believe that in the final analysis the legislature will too.
But have you foreclosed on that option of?
I don't think I think it's better to bond for the whole amount. I don't quite see, trying to slice a piece off for legacy fund does anything. It's a fairly, the numbers I've seen, $30 to $45 million, depending on how you slice it, out of a $241 million bonding request. To me is not worth the political problems that come with it.
One more question?
Is this the week when there's finally some progress toward passing a biking stadium bill?
Well, it has its first committee hearing this week in the Senate, I understand, and we'll see. We'll see.
What are you doing about that now? Are you pulling people in?
We had a meeting this morning at 8 o'clock on our own staff and with Mr. Mondale and his staff, and we laid out a plan. We're going to contact legislators, and anybody who wants to talk with me or meet with me, I'm fully available. And we have a couple of meetings. Actually, they're early next week is the League of Cities, I guess, is meeting in Washington this week. So members of the Minneapolis City Council are out there, but we have meetings with them next week. And, I'll just continue to encourage the people of Minnesota who support the stadium to contact their legislators. Most of them are too busy working every day to be able to hang out here at the Capitol as some of the paid lobbyists for the groups that oppose this. So the people's voices need to be heard, and I'm confident that if they are heard, people here at the legislature will recognize this is in the public interest. This is 8,000 construction jobs and 5,000 support jobs, and keeping the Vikings here for the next generation. Having a showcase stadium for the people of Minnesota to use, and conversely, letting the Metrodome just wither away into a white elephant that has to be publicly supported with no pro-sports activity there at all.
Where do you see it being more problematic in the House or the Senate?
I really can't say. I don't know. I haven't taken that read. Got to have it in both, obviously. Thank you.